So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's historic event. This is the first time we're holding Molloy Speaks during the academic year, so thank you all for taking the time. So I'm DJ Mitchell, and I serve as your Vice President for Mission Integration, and it's such a joy to welcome you to today's very first Molloy Speaks during the academic year. So this gathering was born out of a simple but powerful idea. The best of Molloy isn't just found in classrooms, offices, or meeting spaces, but in the voices and stories of our people, our community. Molloy Speaks is a chance for us to pause, come together, and share the truths, journeys, and insights that shape who we are as a community guided by our Dominican Catholic tradition. So each month, you'll hear from students, faculty, and staff who are living out our Dominican pillars of study, spirituality, service, and community in ways that remind us why Molloy matters. These aren't just values written on a page. They're alive here and now in the people sitting beside you and within our speakers who you will hear from today. So today, as we begin a new tradition, I invite you not to just listen, but to really take in what's said. Let it spark reflection, connection, and maybe even a little inspiration you carry with you when you leave. So thank you so much for being a part of this first step in what I hope will become a tradition at Molloy. And now, I'm happy to introduce Molloy Speaks. Before I hand it over, if you're interested in speaking, there's a QR code here where you can sign up. We want to hear from everybody. This is an opportunity to practice professional speaking, and then you'll get a little treat at the end when we celebrate all of our speakers. So, again, welcome to Molloy Speaks.
Thank you, sir. I don't know what that treat is yet, but I'm excited for it. So thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate it. Full disclosure, some of you heard this talk at Community Day, so I hope it's not too boring hearing it repeated, but I do think it's interesting, so I appreciate you all being here. I'm Brian Bajak. I'm an assistant professor of theology and religious studies here at Molloy, just starting my fourth year. I'm especially grateful to DJ for actually inviting me to present this material again. Frankly, I'm honored and humbled, so thank you, DJ, thank you, Jackie, thank you, everybody involved, Michelle. This is going to be fun. So my research explores the relationship between otherness and similarity in various theological accounts of personhood. A bit more on that in a second. For now, I need to introduce the topic that I have been asked to speak about today: reflective listening to ourselves, our God, and to the signs of the times in our contemporary world. Now, this is admittedly a lot to unpack, especially in the small amount of time that I have been allotted. And so as I was initially struggling with how to, frankly, present all of that, what really struck me is how all three of those types of listening are inhibited by a common problem: our tendency to assume we already have all the answers. Now, I don't know about you, but if I am really honest with myself, I definitely don't have all of the answers, even in relation to the topic of my talk today. Sorry in advance. The good news is, I'm not in this alone. I don't have to start from scratch every time I prepare a syllabus or begin an article or a book or even a talk like this one. I participate in and engage with a tradition in dialogue with other traditions, and I have models, examples of authenticity that I can look to for help. I would like to introduce all of you to a few of them today. So first, we have the two thinkers whose research forms the backbone for my entire project, Bernard Lonergan and Emmanuel Levinas. Now, they both wrote a lot about a very wide range of topics. I'm not going to bore you with all of the details, I promise. I just want to touch on two of their bedrock insights that I think are especially relevant to the topic of this talk today. First, Lonergan. Some of you have heard this before. You know it is time for me to make a confession. I was educated by Jesuits, not by Dominicans. Scandalous, I know. And hence my affinity for Bernard Lonergan, a Jesuit. But the very good news is that Lonergan's work was also deeply influenced by the thought of St. Thomas Aquinas, a very important Dominican theologian, and therefore I'm hoping, and I see some nods, thank you, that y'all will give me a pass. Echoing both St. Ignatius Loyola's emphasis on the importance of discernment in finding God in all things, and Aquinas' arguments that all instances of truth, goodness, beauty, even being itself, are participations in God, Lonergan challenges us to ask better questions about ourselves, others, our cultures, our religions, and even about God. Why? Well, for Lonergan, questioning and faith aren't opposed. He argues that our impulse to question is actually rooted in something sacred, our desire to know not just about the universe, but ultimately about God. And so, as a very, very basic starting point, Lonergan offers some suggestions for questions that we can all ask ourselves. First, how can I be more attentive to the world I experience? Next, how can I better understand the meanings of what I experience? How can I make better judgments about what's really true and really good? How can I decide to act more responsibly? And ultimately, how can I learn to love more fully? Lonergan challenges each of us, everyone in here and me, to ask ourselves these questions, but here's the kicker. We can't actually do this alone. We exist in relationship, which is a fantastic transition to the thought of Emmanuel Levinas, whose entire project is rooted in a simple but challenging suggestion. The other matters. For Levinas, the obligation to the other, to each other, is divinely originated, and he goes so far as to argue that in and through the face of the other, God speaks to me, and so I am met with the divine command, thou shalt not kill. Now, hopefully I am not, and I can attest to this, regularly tempted to commit murder, and neither are any of you, please. Levinas means much more than just that. If I'm really trying to overcome the violence of indifference and meet the needs of the other, to live up to my responsibility for them, then I will actually radically reorient my whole way of being in the world as being for the other. And so I will meet the needs, especially of those most marginalized, by saying, here I am, and send me. Now, those of you that are familiar with the Hebrew Bible know Levinas did not make that up out of thin air. He also participated in a tradition, and his writings are deeply shaped by the sources of his own Jewish faith, especially the latter Hebrew prophets, who in their own very tumultuous times prioritized the obligation to the poor, the widow, the foreigner, the orphan, and the refugee. Fascinatingly, Levinas highlights how another Jew, Jesus of Nazareth, foregrounded these same concerns in his own ministry, prioritizing the needs of those most shunned and despised by people in positions of power. As it turns out, a very wide range of faith traditions share similar concerns, and I think this is a great bridge to how a whole lot of theologians can help us to listen more openly and to ask better questions. So, listening to Hiba Abujaderi, A.J. Levine, or Sapna Pandya, we might really challenge ourselves to ask, how many of my presumptions about those that are different than me are rooted in myths and misunderstandings? And how do I overcome my tendency to project those onto others? How do I learn to listen to them more honestly? Next, listening to Sean Copeland or Lynn Tonstad, we might really challenge ourselves to ask, who's being left out of the conversation? Who am I ignoring because elements of their identities, race, gender, biological sex, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, religious affiliation, disability, are simply too other for my comfort? And how do I overcome my tendency to build up barriers that other people? And we might connect this back to the mission of the university, listening to Ignacio Ellacuría, who, in an address given only a few years before he was assassinated by the Salvadoran government, precisely because he spoke out against injustice, challenged his fellow academics to ask difficult questions, like, in a world filled pretty clearly with so much suffering, how are universities obligated to help transform societies? And especially, when I am researching and teaching, or in the case of students, studying, with whom is my heart? Now, in my own commitment to research and teach as a theologian, I have to remind myself to ask questions like this, but I gotta be honest, it's hard. Thankfully, I'm not in this alone, and neither are any of you. Regardless of our roles here at Molloy, we're all called to participate in a shared mission, which integrates us as inclusive community, orders our scholarship towards more than just self-gain, and helps us act in the service of others. We may occupy very different disciplines and thus different headspaces when it comes to study, service, community, spirituality, but I'd like to end by suggesting that, just as I try to remind my students and frankly myself, the way we listen to and hopefully meet the needs of those rendered least and othered most says a lot about ourselves and our self-understanding, our understanding of mission and meaning, maybe even religion and spirituality, and our understanding of our work here at Molloy. Again, these are difficult questions, and we live in tumultuous times. I don't pretend to have all of the answers, but that's part of the reason that I am so grateful for spaces like this, where I have the opportunity and, frankly, the privilege to listen to and reflect with all of you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name's Dr. Lisa Nelson. You'll also see me as DiGregorio. That's just changed, Dr. DiGregorio. I'm in the School of Nursing, and I teach the psychiatric mental health nurse practitioners, which is just wonderful. My research was on barriers to healthcare for transgender individuals. And this, it was, of course, focused on healthcare, because I'm a nurse, but it resonates through society, our students, what we could do in society for our students, if you're a provider, as a provider. So it really does cover anybody that we touch. So, first, gender refers to an individual's deeply experienced and intrinsic sense of who they are. Transgender individuals are those whose identity of who they are is different than the identity they were assigned at birth. Cisgender are individuals who identify as the gender they were assigned at birth. Now, this should not be put together with gender identity is different than sexual orientation. I ran a group with transgender individuals who are my age and older, who lived their lives not as the identity that they were, and they raised families, and then they decided, when they became older, I can't do this anymore. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because sexual orientation came into it when they transitioned. Some marriages stayed together, and they had, a sex life, and some parted because that was something that they didn't connect with. And the woman, the trans woman, who runs the Friedman Center, which is a LGBTQ center for groups and support and for therapy, said it to me this way. She said, gender is who I am, and sexual orientation is who I want to go to bed with. So if you look at it that way, it's pretty clear. Barriers. Active erasure, passive erasure, institutional erasure. Active erasure is the violence, either verbally or actively, against an individual who's transgender. And it also happens with providers, in provider offices. Passive erasure is not knowing that they're transgender individuals and not knowing that it's important to know about transgender individuals and their issues. And institutional erasure really speaks to us in university. They are in provider textbooks. There are no mention of transgender and transgender issues. Even in medical schools, PA schools, nursing schools. So we have to really look at that. I was very, and it's not only in the provider realm. I was very happy when I published my manuscript. I guess this is how they found me. Two business professors approached me to write in their business textbook a chapter on transgender issues. So I was thrilled because this touches everybody. So we all should be addressing this in our classrooms. And this quote really hit me. All of this time I survived, I'm one of the walking dead, because we're not counted, we're not represented anywhere. One of the issues is society, we all have this automatic belief that the gender we are assigned at birth is the gender we are. So when a transgender individual comes into our life, comes into our classrooms, comes into our workplace, it challenges that belief. And that's an unconscious thing. So we may not even know what we're feeling or why we're feeling it. Barriers to healthcare range from discrimination, which I talked about before, active erasure, passive erasure, lack of provider knowledge. Many transgender individuals, when you speak with them and in the research, say that they stop themselves from going for care because they feel like they're teaching their provider. Their provider isn't aware of what their needs are and their healthcare risks. And also mental health issues. We have to be, of course, I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner, so this is where I go. And with in psychiatry, we can't assume when somebody comes into our offices, oh, their issue is because they're transgender. They need to work on their transgenderness. It's not about that. When you look at the research, what it's about is depression, anxiety, for the way they're being treated by society, for their marginalized status, for not having protection by laws. So those are the issues they're coming in with. So when we see a transgender individual, we can't assume their issue is being transgender, because we'll miss everything they need. Transgender individuals experience discrimination through microaggressions, overt expression of disapproval. Now, I'm told that I'm very expressive. So to do this, you have to really be aware of who you are and how you present. And in psychiatry, I could tell you that we work on that because how we present in our verbal and nonverbal is very, very important. So we need to look at that, not pathologizing transgender identification. So when we look at a transgender individual, they're a transgender individual. There's nothing pathological about it. And at this point, I'll tell you, I was remiss. Transgender female is a person that was identified as birth as male, and their true identity is female, so they're a transgender female. And a transgender male is someone who is identified at birth as their gender as female, and their true identity and transition is to being a male. So we have to not pathologize that experience. Invasion of bodily privacy has happened, according to the research, where transgender individuals will go in to their primary for bronchitis. And the primary is so interested in what's happening with transgenderness that they'll say, "Can I see your top surgery?" It has nothing to do with why they're in for their illness. So invasion of bodily privacy. Difference blindness, which I talked about before. The unconscious assumption that everyone's cisgender. So when we have that approach, when somebody transgender comes into our life, it challenges that belief. Unconsciously, So we have some reactivity, and we have to really work on that. Self-awareness essentials. That's what it all comes down to. We have to be self-aware. To have these changes and really approach transgender individuals in the way they should be approached as human beings that are transgender, and that's their gender identity. We need to be aware of how we see the world, how we see our identity. And of course, there are many ways to be self-aware. Of course, I think everyone should go to therapy because I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner and I say this to everyone. So that helps self-awareness, just reflecting on ourselves, meditating, which really helps our self-reflection, self-development, learning, reading, mindfulness, being in the moment with the person you're with. So there are a lot of ways. Now, when we do studies, there have been studies in the past, even healthcare studies, where transgender individuals weren't able to identify. So if you're not able to identify, how do we know what you need? So we need it's starting to change now. And when we direct our students to do research, we need to tell them that transgender individuals need to be able to identify. Also, we want to ask transgender individuals, what are the issues? What are the things you need addressed? And have enable trans individuals to participate in the research. Also being aware of transgender individuals, there are different communities they're in. So they may be in a community that has several levels of discrimination. And so their needs might be different. So it's not one size fits all when we research. And we need to put trans issues in textbooks. Like I said, I'm thrilled that it's going in a business textbook. Non-pathologizing research questions, which you really have to be mindful when you write that question, right? Because if you're not aware that it's pathologizing, how are you going to fix it? So that self-awareness is key. Trans issues in curriculum, and creating a trans-sensitive environment, which I think as professors, we really need to be aware of and use the right pronouns and model that. Ask students what name they want to be addressed as, what their pronouns are, and use them. It doesn't matter if it's legally changed. Use them. Society, if we change it up and have society assume that everyone is transgender and can be transgender, that might take that barrier away that we have that reaction when somebody transgender comes into our life. So we need to recognize the influence of institutional barriers on the lives of transgender individuals in the healthcare, in workplace, in our classrooms, and promote social change. So anytime you see laws or discussions that are coming up that are taking rights away from transgender individuals, we need to write our congressman. We need to, I know as a healthcare provider, the healthcare, like the American Nurses Association, they'll contact us and say, as a member, and say, this is what's happening, send this letter. So it might not be as easy when you're not in the healthcare field, but if you see something coming up that way, write your congressman. Let them know that this is not okay for us. So we need to increase our awareness of our own worldview and get in touch with that, and aspects of our own identity and get in touch with that. And once we're secure in all that, it's easier to be secure with the rest. Okay.